think someone's at my door. Let me open that up.
Hello there.
Oh, aren't you a creepy-looking man? What's going on?
Oh, well, I have just been inquiring about this sign at your door, saying that you are renting a room.
Why, yes. Ever since my husband died, I've always wanted to rent my room.
No, oh, that's very cool. Oh, that's fantastic. So, yeah, I was wondering that if I can inquire the room rentage. I am but a humble professor.
Well, you'll have to pardon all the podcasting equipment. He was a podcaster, you see.
Oh, he was a podcaster.
Yes.
Oh, I love podcasts. You know, I too have acquired interest in recording a podcast.
Yes. What is that about?
Well, you see, me and my fellow host there, we like to come together and we record a show called Nothing New, a Remake Podcast. Hello, I am Justin Quizon. With me, holding his giggles. Nope, not very well. His
Hi, I'm Andrew Linde. You know, I should have known you were going to go that way. But then I did. I was like, let me serve you up a little podcast.
It's like I saw Andrew threw the ball, got the bat, and I went ready to hit it. Folks, today we'll be talking about the film The Ladykillers, 1955.
And The Ladykillers from 2004.
This is a Patreon episode, to a certain degree. This was paid by a Patreon.
Yes. Kent gave us, that he upped his Patreon level to the next level. Gave us some options. We were very, grateful that we had options. But this was, we kind of decided on this one, on the Ladykillers.
Yeah. And the full disclosure, and the only reason my personal choice on picking is like, you know what? I've actually never seen the original. I've never seen the 2004.
Wow.
So I am actually kind of curious about finally giving it a shot. How about you? What was your kind of deciding factor on doing Ladykillers?
Well, I narrowed it down to 2. We had 3, and then I narrowed it down to 2. And I can't remember what the other one was, but it was certainly. I thought this one would be interesting only because I had seen the Coen Brothers version. There was a time when I was like, let me watch every Coen Brothers movie.
I get that.
And yeah, it was, and so I was like, well, I've always wanted to see the original. I've always been intrigued. Let's do it. Yeah, I was like, let's do it.
So, okay, now we got that aside. We're not going to do our usual, have you seen this? Nope.
No, yeah, no chance that I've seen. Here's the funny thing about this. Neither of these films are streaming on a service where you can, just stream it. Like, they're not on Netflix or Max or anything. You have to rent them.
So, actually, Ladykillers is, in fact, available on Criterion Channel.
Oh, okay.
But you're right on Ladykillers 1955 Ladykillers is on Criterion. It's still kind of, not everyone has Criterion.
Criterion's it's super niche.
It's super niche. Yeah. And it is available. I don't think that one is particularly available easily. But you're right on 2004 Ladykillers. I had to rent that one, which I'm like, all right, fine.
I went to my local library and they had both DVD copies available. Unfortunately, the 55 one was not the Criterion Collection version, which meant it had no special features and no bells, no whistles. I put the DVD in and it started playing.
Oh my God, it's one of those DVDs.
It was one of those. I was like, did they make this at the library? I was like, how? I didn't even think they made these anymore.
Was this print to watch?
I guess. I was like, whoa.
This guy wants the Ladykillers.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked. But yeah, so that was, they're not super accessible, which is kind of interesting, especially from what I can gather about the 1955 Ladykillers, which we will now be talking about. Right. It's on Criterion. It's considered a classic.
Yes.
It is considered one of these movies that changed movies. One of these movies that people, that filmmakers looked at and said, oh, we can do that?
Right.
We're going to do that now.
Right.
It came out, it's about people doing a heist. But at the time it came out, the heist movies were slick and clean. And this was what if it was a heist but funny?
Right.
And it's it changed so much just with that. And kind of the using kind of archetypal trope characters. and playing into. I mean, I'm certain there's British things in the movie that neither of us understood.
Sure.
But I mean, for me, I especially some of it I was like, I'm bored to tears like some of this movie, but other parts I was like really into. So
Right.
it was an interesting first watch.
You know, I'm with you too, and I'll admit, like, I will be upfront. I was sort of surprised how I agree with you on the bored to tears element sometimes, where I was like, ooh, I'm not really. I thought I would jive with this because I generally love British comedies. I even love dry British comedies. So I thought, oh, great. I've always wanted to see this. And then as I'm watching it, I am struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's my personal taste. Maybe I'm just blah, blah, blah. But there are times when it's not that funny to me, you know, which I feel like I felt fake for a little bit as a film fan. I went, but this movie, look, it's not like I have to love every critically acclaimed film, but I thought, look, it's 5 interesting characters.
Yeah.
Put in a very interesting and I'll admit funny scenario. What if a couple of criminals, guys who are going to do a heist, decided that their safe house is a house that's owned by this sort of not all there old lady.
Yeah,
and
a busybody.
A busybody. Or as I remember, maybe is this the correct term to use, when we watch Mr. Deeds, is she pixelated?
Yeah. For sure.
And so, like, she is their biggest problem.
Yeah.
Like, she will bother them constantly. She will always show up at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. She will make their job hard.
And they don't know that she goes to the police for everything.
Right.
She is a frequent visitor with the sheriff and the police, whatever they call them, you know, over there where it's like they are tired of her.
Yes.
But they don't know that it's just like her instinct is, oh, I'll go call the police. Right. Oh, I'll go talk to the police real quick.
And like, because they're down the street from where she lives, it's not a problem for her to do such a thing. Mm-hmm. It's almost her morning routine.
Yeah.
And you can tell every time she comes in, the cops are like, hello, Mrs. Wilberforce.
Yeah.
How are you today?
So it's the setup is...
It's kind of great.
It's great, yeah. It's kind of like, and it plays into its humor.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But each of the we want to go down the cast.
Let's go down the cast.
I mean, I don't even know how. It's Alec Guinness. Like what are you gonna do? It's Alec Guinness is Professor Marcus. But now my first thing about Alec Guinness though, what did they do to him? They gave him a really bizarre hairdo.
Yeah.
And big fake teeth.
I
think at one point I was like, is this what Judge Doom was based off of? Like, his look is so bizarre.
Well, and then there's apparently a rumor that his look was supposedly, and his mannerisms were supposedly inspired by actor Alistair Sims.
Oh, okay.
When you hear that, you're like, when I heard that, I'm like, oh, I see it.
He played Scrooge.
He played Scrooge
famously, and yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, no, here's the funny thing about Alec Guinness, right? Like Alec Guinness in this film, like, you know, like obviously, clearly, yes, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi, but
I mean, this is like 20 years before that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But well before that, he was, Bridge on the River Kwai, freaking Dr. Zhivago, obviously Lawrence of Arabia.
Well, and then even within this movie, so he had worked with this, or would go on to work with this director, several times, directed by Alexander McKendrick.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's an Ealing film production. That was, he worked on several Ealing films. So it was just like, this was his time.
Oh yeah, and to be fair, like, I just realized, like, all those movies I mentioned, that's after this film.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. Yeah, he was kind of the Ealing's comedy guy.
Yeah.
Before he became very, like, almost a prestigious guy with Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia, So he was actually known for comedies, which is funny to think about because when I saw him, my instinct was to think that this is a different actor who was on the cast because this actor is very famous for playing big characters in interesting looks. Let's say who I'm talking about.
Peter Sellers.
Peter Sellers,
who he plays Harry Robinson. It truly, when Peter Sellers did appear in this film,
Mm-hmm.
I think it took me 15 minutes to realize it was Peter Sellers because he's just a guy.
And not just he's just a guy, and he's the young guy.
He's the young guy, yeah.
He had like curly hair.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is the role for an up and comer.
Yeah.
Which my brain was like, oh, I didn't realize how young Peter was in this movie.
Yeah.
I was not.
Like, there are other characters doing things in this movie that you would expect Peter Sellers to be doing.
100%.
Like climbing out of windows, getting stuff dropped on them, like mugging for the camera, basically.
Yeah.
He's the guy who does none of that.
Right.
And so I was like, oh. I was like, oh no. I was like, maybe this is why I'm like not going with the flow in this movie, because it's like it's out of sync with what we know these people for.
Right, exactly. If you said Peter Sellers was the Professor Marcus character, I would, of course he is.
Yeah.
Clearly. No, that's Alec Guinness. That's Alec Guinness. What does Peter do? He's the roundabout way, the straight man? No.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's really, I mean, yeah, I think someone who knows Peter Sellers for like Pink Panther,
right,
and they watch this, they'd go, oh, what? Is this his first movie? I mean, it could be. Is it? I didn't even.
I'll double check on that.
But yeah, I think it's so early in his career that he's just there.
Yeah,
he's just there.
It's very it takes you aback, and I think you're totally right on that. Like kind of like your brain's catching up.
Yeah.
If you're a film fan and you haven't actually seen this yet, you are almost like, I'm sorry that I'm kind of screwing. I'm sorry that I'm like not, correctly, pointing out what's, like correctly putting you in this film and letting you be here. But my brain is thinking, but you're supposed to be like the big broad comedy guy.
Yeah. But that's kind of Alec Guinness in this. Like, he's kind of doing a weird comedy move.
The teeth choice is so obvious. Is like so I almost say like that's almost half his character.
Yeah.
That it's almost it's so important to his character that I have to leave a pin on it.
Yeah. So there's 5 guys in total. So we've gone through 2 of them. The other 3 are Cecil Parker as Major Claude. He's kind of a doofus, right? Like, I want to hit these characters and like what their role they're fulfilling. So it's like the professor is in charge. He's the planner. Like we said, Peter Sellers is Harry. Harry is the young guy. He's the new guy. The major is kind of. I got the feeling that the professor and the major had worked together before. That kind of was like he's bringing him in again, that kind of thing. Louis, played by Herbert Lom, who would go on to be in the Pink Panther movies with Peter Sellers, which is so funny to see them here where they're just like barely interacting. He plays like, where do they say that they say he's from, is he Italian? They say he's like vaguely Mediterranean. He's not British.
He's the foreign one.
Yeah, it's the foreigner, but he's just not British. It's really, he still speaks English and all that. And then the last guy, the muscle, Danny Green, is One Round.
One Round Lawson,
a boxer, right? Obviously, and he's kind of the real dope. But there is like I don't know. Each of them does fit a trope character or something that you would see, in other heist films or even anything where they've got a group of people.
Yeah.
Like you easily identifiable as you look at them.
They are definitely characters from other crime movies, just twisted the knob to slightly funny.
Yeah.
And that means that all of a sudden all their character tropes are like kind of heightened more than, let's say, if they were in like a proper gangster film.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like tied into the fact that how big like Alec plays the professor. He plays it so broadly and so comedically that everyone sort of the whole movie is that tone, and the other characters are adjusted to him to fit the tone that they're doing. So I guess here's the thing. And Jesus,
oh well, sure.
Of course, Katie Johnson as Mrs. Louisa Wilberforce, the their biggest obstacle.
Yeah.
She's very good. Let me be clear on that. She's very funny, and it's the right kind of like over-doting, over very British older lady that is the, again, I see how funny that can be. Like a bunch of like criminal tough guys and a mastermind, and their biggest obstacle is this lady who wants to just give them tea.
Yeah.
You know? Like even pitching that, I'm like, that's funny.
Yeah.
So, but I guess here's where, again, like the struggle for me sometimes with this movie, that there are points in the film where I'm like, I sort of get the joke that they're doing, but it's not working for me because it's just like it's so dry and lag that for my personal, very maybe stupid modern taste, I don't know. I feel like I want to apologize for not loving it more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do kind of have that instinct as well. Because I think it's also because we look into this movie and it's like, yeah, this is considered like such a big movie,
right. Influential.
Mm-hmm.
It got nominated, won awards, etc. There's a reason why there's more than one iteration of this. So why don't I love it?
I was trying, she has a parrot. I want to make sure we talk about the parrot.
Oh, of course, I'm talking about the parrot. Yeah.
That was where I was beginning to get tired, because the bit with the parrot is like the first time you hear it, it's like yelling like it's being murdered, which is like, I think supposed to be like, oh, kind of shocking but funny. And then that kind of continues, and then the parrot gets out, and then all the guys are scrambling to get the parrot. That's where like a big like physical comedy set piece happens, where like they're breaking chairs, they're falling off the roof, like they're all kind of involved in this insanity of helping this old lady get her parrot back. Right. And it's just like, I was like, oh, I'm tired. Like, I'm tired of this already.
And again, that sounds funny.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm not laughing. It's sort of bothering me that I don't think that's funny. Because you even explaining that, I went, oh, that's funny. It's like a bunch of like criminal blokes. Okay, well, we have to do this crime, but we need to get the parrot because the lady's gonna screw this up if we don't get the parrot.
Yeah.
But yet I'm watching and going, yeah, it's a lot of big, broad beats. I'm sorry, film fans, if you're pissed at me right now for not really loving this. I was like, oh no, it's, you know what kind of reminds me, like, this reminds me of anything. If you ever listen to our Benview on Spielberg episode that me and Emily did about 1945.
Oh, yeah.
That was a movie where we were both like, we see what you're trying to do, Spielberg. And I'm sure even, again, more like, Kent, I'm sorry if you're a fan in this film. I'm so sorry if I'm making you mad. I feel like I have to keep apologizing for this, but like, and you pay for this, so again. But like, there are these bits that I would describe that happened in the movie. If you listen to that episode that me and Emily did, Emily was like, see, you talking about that actually sounds funny, but in execution, it just was too much when you view it, when you see it visually. And it's like everybody's like comedy screaming in 1945. You know, there's screaming and then there's comedy screaming. There is a weird difference. Here, it's like the gags are so big, and like you said, it's just tiring. It's like, oh, I get it. You know?
Yeah. It's really like I think the moment that I realized Peter Sellers was Peter Sellers was when he is bit by the parrot.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second. I was like, that's Peter Sellers. I'm like, why is he not blowing this up like that? Like, this should be so funny that he was bit by the parrot.
Right.
And then it's one round who gets on a chair to try and reach the parrot on top of a dresser or something, and he breaks the chair because he's huge.
Right.
So it's like, should be funny, but I'm like, oh, they're just kind of like whatevering it. And then it just ends with Alec Guinness gets the bird. He's just outside and happens to get it. And then it like just moves on. The movie just moves on in a way where I was like, oh, were we done there? I guess. Yeah, like all of the timing of it felt off. There's a lot of weird performance things that I felt were off too. I mean, we said it with Alec Guinness. I'm like, I know he can act. Like,
yeah.
I know, but it was like something about his commitment to the teeth, to the everything. I was like, he's not bringing out, like, I kept, every time I saw him in the movie, I was like, why would this old lady trust him?
Right.
Like they made him
Right.
like he kind of looks almost like the Phantom of the Opera. You know what I mean? Like he's just got this crazy look where I'm like, why would anyone trust? Why would he think he's trustworthy?
You know what it is? Maybe it just kind of occurred to me right now. And this is where I feel like maybe this is the big appeal for everyone else and like etc. But I'm looking at like Alec Guinness' character, One Round, etc. Louis. These are great one scene characters for my taste. Does that make sense? Like if let's say someone goes like, like if like it was like a detective movie, like we have to go meet the professor. Who's the professor? And it's Alec Guinness in the same setup, and he's only in it for one really weird scene. Yeah, and then you go, what a character, and then you don't see him ever again, but you remember him. It's like 5 minutes at max is like the right amount for that character. But the fact that he's essentially the lead in this film means we have to watch him for an hour and a half, and it's very tiring for my modern taste, you know. And maybe that's great for someone else. Clearly, it's great for other people.
Well, I do think they do well at committing to these are criminals.
Yeah.
Like they're not good people. So it's like it is the fun is like you're saying we're used to this being a small character. Yeah. So I think they are trying to have fun with like what if we spent the whole movie with these 5 weirdos that you normally watch a movie you go, God, that guy's a weirdo. Ooh, I hate him. And now it's like now you got to spend the whole movie with him. It's like yeah. Like that didn't quite translate as well as you want, but I there are little things that the actual heist itself I liked.
Yeah, I actually like the heist, yeah.
I'm like, what is it about this that works for me? I guess because they're not trying to be funny in that moment.
Right.
Like, it's just very technically well shot.
Right. Oh, it is great. The heist is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, they block in a cash car with 2 other cars, and they knock out the guys, and then they pry open the bag.
Yeah.
Which is One Round, the strong guy, he has to pry open the bag, which is like, that's so cool to see. And then their idea was they have a fake getaway car that the cops will go after, because, of course, if a car speeds off, you think that's the car. And then the other car, and then they do some business where they hide the money in some luggage, and it's at the train station, and then the old lady picks it up.
Yeah.
Which is like, so they don't even, their detachment from the crime is so, like, the plan's pretty good. Not a bad plan.
Yeah.
And then the way that it's shot, really good. And then they try and fit in a comedy element here. Right at the end of the heist, where it's one guy is on the phone watching to see if she picks up the bag.
Yeah.
And then all the rest of them are on the other phone listening. And it's like she has to double back and ask for help, but they don't realize. So they think that she thinks something's up. So they all pile into the phone booth, and I'm like, well, this should be funnier. But it's like you said, they're scream acting.
Yeah.
They're like, they're like piling into the phone booth. And it's like, this isn't funny. Like, come on, like get on with it.
Yeah, honestly, after the heist, that's kind of when the movie was starting to pick up for me.
Oh, yeah, and then it started cooking again. Yeah,
I think it's like after that, like all of a sudden, all of the tension that was for their scenario starts actually really working for me. Like you said, started cooking for me. Like all of a sudden, once she realizes like she's asking questions about the money and why do you have the money and what's going on with the money, and so they're all trying to make sure they don't piss her off, they don't make her go to the cops, because that's her instinct. And now it's like stepping on, it's like just tiptoeing in the scenario. Like, how do we get the money?
And I love
back from her.
I love the way that she accidentally sees the money.
Yeah.
So that's funny.
That's funny. Yeah.
He One Round, he forgot his cello case, and of course it's full of the money, so he has to go back in and get it. She closes the door. The strap on the cello case gets stuck in the door, and he's like pulling, and he's a brute, so he's pulling, and they're like, just knock on the door, just ring her. And she sees,
but he ain't no smart. You know?
She sees that he's still at the door. Something's going on. He breaks it. It busts open. Money flies everywhere. She opens the door. Yeah. It's over. Everyone in the car, they're all in the car waiting for him. They're like, oh God, no. And that's funny. And I don't know what, there's a different, like, something happened there where it was like, I was like, yeah, we got funny. We actually get to the funny part at the end.
Yeah.
But and I think it's like you're saying, it is the tension. It is like the fact that now they have to really grapple with her.
Right.
They have to figure out, okay, can we bribe her?
Mhm.
Can we lie to her? What can we do to get through this?
Yeah.
That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, 100%. And I almost feel like, as I'm talking to you about it, like it's like maybe the biggest problem for me with the first half is that it's set up for the kind of relationship that they're gonna have with her, but it's long, and I'm just struggling to like it's to the point where I get it, but here now that we've actually paid off setting up that relationship, they have to try every angle they have with her to succeed in trying to get away with the money. And she's still shocking them, specifically the professor, with her left choice, right choice. And they're like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And it gets really funny. I will admit, like, now I'm, like, laughing and I'm invested. And the scenario gets worse and darker, but in that fun black comedy kind of way. Like eventually the guys just start going.
Well, yeah, they first, the professor tries to explain, look, we all stole this money because we have sad sob stories.
That's so good.
And it's like, whether or not you believe the major's sob story, it's like, is he making that up? Is it true? Does it matter? One way, because all that matters is does Mrs. Wilberforce believe it?
Right.
Does it affect her choice? And it kind of doesn't. And then, but the professor's like, look, the money's already gone. The insurance is taking care of it. In fact, returning the money's worse at this point. They're going to be confused. And she's like, what? And he's like, yeah, it's only a little bit off of everyone's insurance policy. They don't even care. And she's like, what? No. She's like, for a second, but then she looks at a picture of her husband, who served in the army or whatever, and she goes, no, the right thing to do. And they tell even the Louis, the foreigner, he is cutthroat,
right.
Like the way that I didn't even there's a kind of a funny way that each character is introduced, where the professor is like, it's almost like a slasher. Like he is like, it's like a horror movie where you see him creeping around the house, and you don't see Alec Guinness's face until she opens the door.
There's even a POV shot he does. That's very stalkery.
Yeah. But then for Louis, when he shows up at the door, he is in shadow. His hat is pulled down low over his face. Like he doesn't even want to be seen by the woman who owns the house.
Right.
But then when he steps forward in the light, he is that like classic gangster stereotype. Like he is a mafia man.
Yeah.
So his angle at the end is he's like, well, I'm gonna say that you planned the whole thing. I'm gonna say Mrs. Wilberforce was the brains behind it all, and she made us do it, and you're part of it because we're at your house. Why else would we be here?
Right.
And so when she decides, she's like, I will take the money to the police. She says, even if I have to go to jail for whatever she says, like 45 years. It was like a funny number because it's like, you're already so old, my God. So they're having to reckon with this idea of they could not convince her.
Right.
And so then they draw straw. Whoever gets the short straw has to go and kill her. That's how they decide. They're like, look, that's the only way now. And it's the major who gets it. And he decides, so he takes her alone in a room. And he decides to kind of trick her and then try and run away with the money. That's like his idea. And so his death is kind of accidental. He falls off the roof. Like no one actually went to kill him. It was his own stupidity, his own like greed. And so there's this, a weird set piece idea is that for some reason her house is at the end of a row over a train tunnel. Yeah.
And it's like slanty, and it's like a little slanty. Yeah.
But it's like the idea of like, that is kind of funny to look at. But then it also plays into the plot because now they can dump bodies onto passing trains. Like that's not gonna, oh well, whatever. Yeah. like they know when the train goes by so they can.
But it's also a very funny visual.
It is.
Because every time they do that, they're always covered in like soot.
Yeah.
which means that they all like it's this great shot. I actually kind of love it every time they do it, where it's like it's the back of their heads holding the legs up, and then when they see the train, you see the and then there's this big black cloud covering them.
Yeah.
As you see them finally drop the body, and then cuts to the other angle, you see them just covered in soot. It's okay. I'll admit, every time they did that, it's really funny every time.
Yeah.
But the bodies start, the bodies do start coming up, and it's weird how the killing of each guy started making me laugh in a fucked up kind of way.
Yeah.
But it is kind of upping the thing because now the stakes are getting higher because now we're just killing them, you know. Like, these guys who you kind of... It's the strangest feeling. And this is probably one of the reasons why the movie's sometimes kind of hard for me to connect in some regard. Because I don't... You know, I didn't connect them as fully as characters. So I can't... You know, and it's not like I needed to empathize with anybody. But the lack of empathy with anybody, even, you know, Mrs. Wilbur was kind of hard to grasp sometimes. Because here it's like, well, I'm not really rooting for anybody here. Like, they're kind of all bastards anyway. They were willing to... They had no problem thinking of the idea of killing an old lady. So every time one of them died, it just only upped the stakes, but also in a manner that like it upped stakes that I didn't really feel bad for that person dying. Strange. I don't know.
I think the empathy issue is a big one.
Okay.
But I think it's because I think we're supposed to feel the most empathy with Mrs. Wilberforce.
Right.
I don't think we're supposed to actually feel any empathy towards the other 5 guys.
But I think the issue with Mrs. Wilberforce is that, like, I think you're right, but
Yeah.
the problem with this, like, she is such a out there character already. It's hard to empathize with Mrs. Wilberforce.
Yeah, they make her very eccentric.
Yeah.
On top of everything else that she does, like there's a bit that she repeats where every time she turns the water on, she has to hit the pipe with a mallet, which is like that's funny business. But I'm like, I don't know what that's doing for, like, it's funny, but like so many other things in the movie. I'm like, I understand that it's funny, but it's not that funny.
Right.
Like, the parrot, I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny, not that funny. Like,
Right.
Every little thing is not quite adding up. And, like, we don't have anything to really ground us with Mrs. Wilberforce.
Yeah.
But except for the fact that she's an innocent, kind of in all of this.
Right.
And all the others we know them to be bad men. Like, they fit a stereotype of each type of heist guy,
Right.
that we're like, we understand immediately. We look at them, we're like, oh yes, of course, we know what you are and what your deal is.
And like much like the other guys, even Mrs. Wilberforce makes sense as a character who shows up in a smaller role in a bigger movie about somebody else, and then she does her funny gags for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And then you go, haha. And you remember that old lady who just kept interrupting, like, very important moments? That's really funny.
Yeah.
But she's a main character here. And so that tone is 90% of the film, you know? And again, it's like I'm almost imagining somebody who's listening to this, who's a big fan of this film, going, that's the point! Which, like, I know, and I'm sorry, it just isn't connecting with me.
It didn't quite work. I think where they do succeed with empathy for Mrs. Wilberforce is that first you get it a little bit from the professor, although it's strained, where at a certain point it looks like they kind of could get the money and go, but he says, no, I promised her that we would not run off with the money. But he says it like through gritted teeth. Like he's not happy about it, but he's like, I am a man of my word,
right.
you know? And then the other one is that one round starts thinking of her like affectionately, like a mother.
Yeah.
And so he's like, no, we can't kill her.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, no, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
So that's I think where they kind of put it in there, but it's a little bit too late. So it's kind of like, it doesn't quite work.
I'm really glad you brought up the one round thing, because that's actually again, this is where the tension really starts working for me. I kind of did wish for me that like there was more one round sees his mother and her earlier, so that like that payoff is so good, because like it's like, look, I get it, he's a very simple person, so I can understand that like he starts going, oh, but she reminds me of me mom, like as a way to kind of have him like, you know, make the situation harder. But what if that happened earlier, where he was like upset about something and she comforted him and he reminded her of his mother that way, and then that your brain goes, uh-oh, if something goes wrong, he might turn on them and protect her. And kind of what happened here, like there's a moment where Harry's coming in he's the one who has to kill her. He pulled the short straw.
Yeah.
And so she's just sleeping. And let's be fair, she didn't look alive. But he pulls the case up, and then one round thinks Harry did it.
Mm-hmm.
He did her in.
Yeah.
After saying, no, you weren't supposed to do that. Kills Harry.
Yeah.
And then finds out, like, she was fine.
Yeah.
Oh,
Just asleep.
She was asleep. Uh-oh. I thought he did her in, though.
Now, okay, I do have to. So you had not seen the Coen Brothers version when you watched this one.
Mm-mm.
Were you aware of how this movie ends?
No.
Okay, because I had seen the Coen Brothers, so I knew the bit kind of this movie is that all of them die by stupid ways, and the old lady kind of gets away with the money, essentially.
Right.
So even watching this movie with that in mind, there were moments where I was like, well, okay, well, how's it? Okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But I'm like still going like, yeah, but at the end they're all going to be dead. But I think that kind of didn't bother me as much because we weren't sympathetic to them.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I'm more on board with that as the ending for this because these guys do like suck. They're all like, like that's just their personality types. So when it escalates here, right? So Harry gets killed by one round. So then they go to dump that body.
Yeah.
But then they're gonna try and use the smoke so they can get rid of one round now, like as a confusion tactic.
Right.
Because Louis is kind of smarter.
Yeah.
Not the professor makes his plans, but Louis like, I know how to make it in this business, basically. So they kind of team up against one round, and that ends up taking out one round.
Right.
So now it's just the professor and Louis. And I do like their endings here.
Yeah.
Where they're having their little chase fight.
Under the bridge.
Yeah.
It's actually it's really well executed. And even down to like how like the professor kind of one-ups Louis. Yeah. And I don't know. How the professor goes out is so good. It's very simple, but I'm like, I did crack. I'm like, oh, that's really funny.
And it's incredibly cartoony.
It's very cartoony.
Yeah. Like they might as well have had like the blam over his head with birds and as he falls. You know?
Right. No. But then it is that is where I realized like, oh, that's the strength of this movie overall is like this sort of cartoony dark ending for these criminals that honestly, it's fine. Let them die because they're kind of bad people. But it also is like, it's so like well executed that the jokes were kind of landing harder for me now finally. That I was like, oh, that's super funny, you know? And yes, she does have the money at the end of the film, and she tries to give back to the cops. And as we established, the cops are just don't even believe her.
I do really enjoy her that scene with the cops.
Yeah.
Because she comes in and she says, well, there were 5 men and then they left. And the other cop there says, oh, did they leave on their flying saucer? I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, they're roasting this lady so hard right in front of her. They do not care at all. They don't care about her.
No, exactly. So when there was like, what about the money? Keep it.
Yeah. And she's like, he did say they'd be confused. Like, she's like, he was right.
It's actually wonderfully written execution because you're right. The professor did set that up in her head that like, well, no, that's just going to make it worse if we give it back. And she's like, well, the professor did say that. And she doesn't know they're dead. She assumed they left.
Yeah, because they disposed of the body. It all happened while she was asleep, basically.
All the bodies are gone.
Yeah.
There's no dead bodies around. And so she's just figuring, oh, they probably left the money and realized the error of their ways. I guess it's okay. It's kind of amazing. Yeah. No, here's the thing. It's strange to think that, like, the first half, you and me both are kind of in agreement of, like, I don't know. But yet, once the heist happens, it's like, it cooks really well. And I'm almost wondering, is the love for this movie actually only on the second half?
Very possibly.
Very possibly. And it's like, maybe because like the first half, I don't know. I'm curious if like what other, if everyone loves the whole thing, great. But I can't it's hard to deny the fact that, like, once the second half kicks in, yeah, I get it. This is really, really good and really funny. That first half does not work for me though. So I don't know.
I'm trying to think of a modern movie that has a similar situation, and I didn't feel this, but I could see people saying that about. Did you see that movie Abigail?
Yeah. Oh no, I haven't seen Abigail yet. But go ahead. Just
I mean, the trailer showed that it's like clearly like this little girl's a vampire. So it's like when you go into that movie, you're waiting the first like 30 minutes for them to kick into that gear.
Okay.
So it's like you're meeting it's a similar thing where it's like, okay, everybody here sucks. They're all criminals in some way. Let's get their criminal backstories out of the way so we can get to the good part where they're all dying by a vamp. It's kind of like I could see people saying that. I was intrigued in that movie at the beginning, but I think there are some movies, because I wouldn't even call this a slow burn.
No.
This is almost like a timed release. Like it's just like,
oh, it's good. Yeah.
It's like when there's something that's going to happen that will just kick off the rest of the movie, and it's like that's what we bought the ticket for.
Right.
We bought the ticket for the heist, and we bought the ticket for them turning on each other and everything going wrong in a funny way.
Yeah.
Not for the beginning where it's like stumbling around.
Right.
Once that, because like you say, the tension hits that moment where it's like, oh, they've got the money. How are they going to get it out?
Yeah.
How are they going to get away with this money? That's what we're there for. So it does have that shift. But yeah, I think even if I watched it again today, I'd be like, oh my God, this beginning is just dragging on. Like, oh my God. Yeah.
No. Okay. Well, now that we got our beginnings finished, will our second half kick into an interesting way? We'll find out when we jump into 2004 right after this.
To all who come to this happy podcast, welcome.
Anna musings are your musings.
Here age relives fond memories of the past.
And here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future.
Hi, I'm David.
And I'm Kayla.
And if it wasn't readily apparent from that, we're huge nerds about Disney. That's why we're doing the Anna Musings podcast.
Once a month, we'll sit down and talk about a film in detail from the Walt Disney Animation Studios filmography, covering them in chronological order, from Snow White to Moana and beyond.
To Moana and beyond!
Sweetie, we're not doing Pixar yet. We'll do that after.
And that's going to be a long time coming. Anyway, if that sounds up your alley, come join Kayla and I, and maybe a guest or two, as we explore the Disney animated canon, film by film.
With the hope that it'll be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world.
Ooh, nicely said.
Don't thank me, thank Walt.
Before we go check out the next widow's house to see if she has a room for rent, let's take a break here and talk about Patreon. Patreon.com/nothingnew. In fact, the reason why you're hearing us talk about the Ladykillers is because of Patreon. Someone on Patreon, Kent, one of our very good patrons, really good guy, he stepped up. He said, I want you guys to talk about the Ladykillers. So here we are doing it. You'll find out more about that in just a moment. But until then, here's a little preview of this month's Patreon episode.
Because it did start as a movie. Before we go into this, there have been other interesting adaptations.
Yes.
There was a Egyptian one made in 1969, and
doesn't that one have? Do you have the name in front of you? It has like it's called like Thieves But Funny.
Thieves But Funny. Yeah.
Which is really like
which that, I'm like, I kind of love that title.
Distilled it down to its essence. Thieves but funny.
And there was a play production, I believe in 2010 or 11, that had Peter Capaldi in the role of the professor, which I gotta say that's fantastic casting. Okay, to listen to the rest of that and much more, including exclusive only episodes, exclusive topics we only discuss on our Patreon. Go ahead and follow us. Join the rest of your fellow patrons for only $1 a month. If you want to do what Kent did and you want to say, hey, I want you guys to talk about these movies, $25 for 1 month. We'll do what you say and we'll cover it for you. We are now getting ready to jump into 2004. You have in fact seen the Ladykillers.
I saw it not when it came out, but like over 10 years ago, I'd say.
But you definitely saw this before the 1955. I still haven't seen this until the recording of this episode.
Mhm.
We usually don't do this, but since the situation's interesting, what was your thoughts of the 2004 film when you got around to watching it?
Back then, didn't care for it.
Okay, now
Didn't care for it. Really, really. As I was watching, a lot of Coen Brothers movies at that time, and this one stood out as a real stinker. It was really a bad time.
were you doing the Coen films in order of release?
No.
Okay.
I don't think I was that dedicated to it. I was just kind of taking them as I could find them on DVD or borrowing.
Okay.
It was a period of borrowing from friends. So if a friend had it on DVD, I don't know how I would have. Maybe this was on Netflix at the time or something. I don't know because I say on Netflix. At that time, I was getting DVDs from Netflix, so that's very possible that I watched it on DVD from Netflix.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Which now I. RIP DVDs from Netflix. Now I get my DVDs from the library. We're back. It's like going back in time, but it's actually forward in time. Everything's better. It's free. I'm like, why was I paying for Netflix? Oh, well.
Yeah.
Then I probably would have gotten the Criterion disc of the 55 if I did it from Netflix. So I guess that's why.
That's fair. Yeah.
But yeah, I remember it really stood out. This and what is that? Intolerable Cruelty.
Yeah.
That one really stood out as bad.
Mm-hmm. It was a interesting period.
Yeah.
For Coens, because it's like they did The Man Who Knew Too Little before Intolerable Cruelty, and while I don't think that's as a high mark as the ones before it, because there was The Hot Streak, Fargo, Big Lebowski, Oh Brother Where Art Thou. That was the hot streak. It was like after a certain point they were kind of unstoppable in ways.
Even what is it? Stealing Arizona? No,
Raising Arizona, and that was before that.
Yeah, and that is like a high mark.
Yeah.
of like, oh, this is like they have a creative voice, they have a very distinct like look, and they're using actors that people don't use in that way.
Right.
It's like holy shit, you have, and then like Big Lebowski is kind of a similar thing where it's like, wow, we're seeing everyone in a new light. This is a story that we haven't really seen told this way. I don't care for Fargo, sorry, but then we move. It's like you go through the
Fargo
era.
was really beloved.
Yes,
and it did kind of like kick off this like string of very critically acclaimed and successful films that had a lot of impact for a lot of folks. Big Lebowski conventions, for crying out loud. There was the music of Oh Brother Where Art Thou. All of a sudden, that shot up into interest and popularity, etc. People started talking like the characters in Fargo for fun. This was their hot streak.
Yeah.
Then Intolerable Cruelty came out. And I think Intolerable Cruelty and the Ladykillers are in this interesting period for them because this was when they were kind of doing what felt like assignment films. The ones for them movies.
Well, the interesting thing about the Ladykillers was that it was apparently supposed to be originally directed by Barry Sonnenfeld.
Which makes a lot of sense when I found that out.
Does make a lot more sense. But the Coens still wrote it. They were going to write it they were writing it for him to direct. Yeah. And he just, there's something, I don't know what came up, but he ended up passing and they took it on.
Now, again, if you don't know why this is significant to their relationship, and why it makes sense for Barry Sonnenfeld. Beyond, if you just know Barry Sonnenfeld as the guy who directed Men in Black, The Addams Family, which we covered, you just assumed because he has like big broad comedies. Well, not just that. He started his career as a DP. Specifically, he was the Coens DP. If you didn't know that. And he was the guy that brought that very visual, distinct style in their early work, specifically Raising Arizona. So it kind of is fascinating to me to see that, like, they wanted to do something where let's write something for Barry. Let's have Barry direct this one, or Barry wanted to direct it, and he got something. You guys write it for me, because at this time his career was kind of like I don't know when the film was in production with the Sonnenfeld going to direct. Maybe this was probably around the time where he was kind of on his own hot streak, So it's a fascinating period where, like, clearly he was going to direct it. Like you said, something happened. And so maybe the Coens looked at the script and figured, well, we kind of like this. We have a fun spin on this. Let's just do it. And it has it has been a bit since Lebowski that they did like a really broad comedy. We're Old Brother Not is pretty broad too, but I think they were like after Intolerable Cruelty, and that got their licks in on not good reception. They maybe figured, maybe just lean into more of our broader comedy bits. Because Intolerable Cruelty, I don't know what the history of that film is. It does feel like Clooney had a film, wanted the Coens to come in to help it, and then they were like, sure, we can do that. And then it got to the point where like, I guess Wilby will direct it. And then it comes off as this very bland, not very them movie.
Yeah.
And it's wild because I think The Man from Nowhere is like, again, not as hot, but I think it's a very interesting movie, and it's a very strong style that feels like them. They go and do Intolerable Cruelty. It just feels like, I guess you guys needed the paycheck. That's fair. So Ladykillers, when it was announced, I was like, maybe. All right, they did their okay one, but all right, but they're gonna be cooking again. And then it came out, and the word was not great. It was real bad 20 years ago.
Since we're talking like looking at it from a production side, before we even get into what the movie is itself, watching this, I was like, were they inspired by Ocean's 11?
Funny, right?
Because Ocean's 11 was 2001 or
so
something.
it would be 3 years after.
So
Ocean's, yeah.
like I could see that. And then the idea that they weren't even going to direct it, that they just wrote it for someone else was like, they were approached. Like they were approached, and it was like heist movies are big, funny, because Ocean's 11 is funny.
Yeah,
it's like this is the classic funny heist movie, but it's British. Can you make it? Can you update it?
Yeah.
Can you do a little update? Can you do a little refresh? And they're like, all right. They give it their go. And it's like, oh no, but it's like it's almost like watching this. It's like, that you learned all the wrong lessons from Ocean's 11. That's really what this feels like. It's like, oh no, everything was through a twisted funhouse mirror. It's like, oh god.
And it's funny because also it's like all the stuff we talked about from the 1955 film apparently was all the stuff you and me weren't crazy about. They apparently loved it, and it is in here times 10.
Yeah.
Oh, that yelling act comedy we talked about. It's in here, and it's in here bad. It's wild to see a Coen Brothers film that is mostly unfunny. Yeah, like almost shockingly unfunny.
Yeah,
and
like kind of shockingly offensive. Like,
yeah.
I was like, oh no. I was like, I'm really, I'm really uncomfortable here.
Here's the thing, right? Like, first off, changing the setting to kind of like the South is hilarious.
Yeah.
That's a great change. Changing to kind of do more, and it's also to their taste. They clearly like that world. They clearly like kind of exploring that kind of region a lot in their films. So,
well, yeah, you talk about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yeah.
That's kind of
exactly.
That was like, it's Odysseus, but it's through the South,
right? Of
a certain time. And that's a period piece. I partway like in this movie, I was like, is this supposed to be the 90s? Like, it's not even 2004. Like, it feels like it's not even current in the sake of being current. Like,
right.
Feels like there's certain things that they reference, like the way that they reference rap music, and there's even I think their version of. What's her Munson? Mrs. Munson is their Mrs. Wilberforce.
Yeah.
She does some. She references Martin Luther King in a way where I'm like, she said 30 years. Yeah. Which I'm like, that would have been. I mean, this is like, now I'm splitting hairs, but I was like, the way she said that felt like this is the 90s. Yeah. I was like, what's going? Like, is it supposed to be said in the 90s? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's the South. They're very into it. And they also bring like religion into this in a bigger way than I think most of their movies. But I think they're trying to make fun of it, but I think they don't want to come across as like assholes about it.
And let's kind of call it out. We are talking about two white men writing a very strong black lady. But is it right? Is it offensive? Is it cartoony?
Well, and especially the way that they use like her religiousness. Like she goes to a church that is all black people, and they are singing
Every
songs in that style where you're like, oh, are the Coens? What are they doing here?
Yeah, what are they saying about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it like, are they trying to say this is funny?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they trying to say, no, this is like nice that she
Yeah.
does this? I
Yeah.
don't know. It doesn't quite come off.
And then there's Marlon Wayans' character.
Yeah. Well,
And-
welcome back, Marlon Wayans.
Welcome back, Marlon
It was
Wayans.
a quick return
He's
because
like, I was not anticipating back-to-back Marlon Wayans, but Snails is back, baby.
I don't. It's funny to me when stuff like this happens where I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, we've never talked about this actor. Okay, now we're gonna watch 3 movies with this actor. I don't know where that happens. Here it is, though.
Oh my god. But okay, but here's the thing, right? Like Marlon is one of those choices where even when I saw him in the trailer back in the day, that I was kind of going, what movie is Marlon in?
Mm-hmm.
Like I know he's in this movie, but like what movie does he think he's in? Does he kind of act, because he's acting like he's in a typical Wayans Brothers film, but there's a Coen sheen to the performance, if that makes any kind of sense.
A little bit.
It's not all like Scary Movie all in. There's a little bit of a holdback, but he's sort of not holding back. And
There's kind of a. I feel like a Coen Brothers character's signature trait is like a righteous indignity,
yes,
where like every character is like, well, obviously I'm correct,
Right.
and so that's kind of what makes it funny. Especially these 5 guys get together and like they're all like, well, I'm correct, so they really start to butt heads.
Yeah.
But then they're speaking, in a very not stilted, but just, I mean, especially the Tom Hanks professor
Yes.
is especially loquacious, we shall say. But
Yeah.
every character has a weird way of talking.
Remember how we're talking about every character in the original film? The original film was like very kind of heightened.
Yeah.
Oh boy, they took that knob and just went a little further, and
Mhm.
everyone is a cartoon.
Well, and they're not just a cartoon in the 55 version, there were cartoon versions of like tropes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of like, oh, the dumb boxer who helps out on the heist.
Mhm.
Oh, the mafia guy who's in it for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. This one is beyond those tropes. They are also now like racial stereotypes,
Yeah.
which is so like, ugh, like,
Yeah.
like it's kind of gross. Like you said, they dial it up.
Mhm.
Like every single one, like even Zima, I was like, oh, like I like him. You're a good actor, but
Yeah.
you've been given a script here where you have no lines
Mhm.
because they're playing up the fact that you're like
An Asian.
not from here.
Yeah, you're some sort of first gen Asian that owns a donut shop, FYI.
Mhm.
And yet I know you can speak English perfectly, and like you said, he's a great actor. I haven't seen Tigerland. I highly recommend. Or Tiger Tail. I highly recommend that film. I'm only going to double check the title, but he's great. I've always been a fan of that guy. And I'll even admit, I kind of dug his performance here, just wish he had lines. You know,
Mhm.
Tiger Tail. If you haven't seen Tiger Tail, it's very, very good. It's on Netflix. He's the lead on that one. It's a
Okay.
beautiful adult movie. But yeah, he's a trope
Yeah,
here. You know,
like racially, like it's
racially
like not,
a trope.
Yeah, it's like not done well.
No, it's.
Yeah.
I'm almost was waiting if Marlon Wayans was going to say, "Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?"
Yeah,
To him, and it's not in a funny way. Also, it's wild to think that Marlon Wayans is the Peter Sellers character in this film.
yes, the equivalents here. So then, even though Zima, his character is called the General,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But he isn't the equivalent to the Major.
No.
He's actually equivalent to Louis,
Mm-hmm.
like the foreigner,
Right.
which is like, oh, okay, so you guys took that literally, huh?
Mhm.
Like, you guys took that way too literally.
Mhm.
So then, and of course, they had to go even harder with their like dumb character.
Mhm.
It's his name is Lump.
Yeah.
And he's played by Ryan Hurst. It's like they just got a guy who can just stare off in the distance and look stupider than any other human around.
And he keeps like referring to like the professor as
It's Coach. Yeah,
Um,
that's a little funny.
that's a little. Hey,
Yeah.
Coach.
There's another thing going on here where each of the characters, we'll get to the other,
Mhm.
but each of these characters, well, I guess besides Tom Hanks plays the professor.
We'll get to Tom Hanks.
Yeah, but he doesn't get, each of the other characters gets an introductory scene outside of the house.
Right, which is something that wasn't in the original.
Wasn't in the original. And
Yeah.
I think that to me was where I saw the Ocean's 11 influence.
Mhm,
Because it's like, okay, this is assembling the team without assembling the team.
Right.
But I also see that as this movie's biggest mistake because now we're starting to have sympathy for each of these guys.
Right.
We see their lives outside of the crime that they are doing. And so with J.K. Simmons, honestly, kind of good in this, but
He's
only
kinda
because he doesn't suffer from all these things that we're complaining about.
Yeah. He does suffer from IBS, though.
He does suffer, yeah. But he is like a stunt prop guy on movie sets. So we get that scene where we meet him there. And then we also meet his like wife, which is like, but her name's Mountain Girl. It is, which, okay. So it's very funny because I just watched, what's it called? Battling Butler, which is a Buster Keaton movie. From, long ago. In that movie, he falls in love with a woman and her only credit is Mountain Girl. And I'm like, I know, God damn you, Coens. I'm like, I know you love in reading into this, there's a gag in this movie that I discovered was from Preston Sturges film.
Yes.
And I'm I know that you guys love Preston. Come on, you got to, Keaton too? You're going to bring in all these old things that nobody's going to understand? You call someone Mountain Girl and everyone just accepts it because the Coen Brothers are weird, so all their characters have weird-ass names? Come on! But in meeting each of these characters before the heist, you feel sympathy for them.
Yeah.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Because with the general, he's at his donut shop and it's about to get robbed and he fights off the robbers.
Right.
Sympathy. Like each and every single one.
Here's the thing, right? I know whoever's listening to this goes like, but wouldn't you guys have an issue with the last one because you didn't have sympathy? That's the problem.
Yeah.
And this is the problem with maybe like the balance of maybe why the high concept is a struggle sometimes. Is that like there is something great about just the guy showing up at Mrs. Wilbur's house one by one in the shadows, or just like these weird men keep coming into her house. And I think if I can just say my personal taste on that, maybe that wouldn't have been so weird if I had more empathy towards Mrs. Wilbur as a character, and if she wasn't so broad. And then that means the broad characters can come in and be weird and goofy, but she can be a human being. Maybe that would have helped me. But here, everyone's still a broad, big character, and now that we're seeing more of their past, like I said, there's sympathy, but they're still acting like big, broad cartoons. And it's now, if you're going to show me their backstory, I kind of did sort of wish that maybe you dialed it a tad bit down. Give me one guy in the group that maybe I could hang my hat on. Maybe Chimok, maybe Timok, or Marlon Wayans, or even J.K. Simmons. J.K. Simmons, though, I will say he's in the right volume, performance-wise.
Well, until they have the IBS moment. And then it's like the whole rest of the movie, he is Mr. IBS.
Yeah, that's true. Like, he does the IBS.
More than half the movie happens before he has his first IBS moment, which is played as a joke.
I want to point something out. Like, you look at the coaster, and you look at that cast, much like the original film, I just can't help but go, like, I want to see that movie.
Yeah.
Look at this. What an interesting mix of people. Even if I wasn't really into Marlon Wayans' other movies, I'm like, he's here? What are you going to do with him? Yeah. And then the answer is, pretty stereotypical things with him. Okay. Let's address the Tom Hanks of it all.
Tom Hanks is in the room with us.
And the last time we've had Tom Hanks, he also put on a silly accent and a big performance, and that would be, of course, in Pinocchio 2022. Look.
Well, and the funny thing is, another recent controversy with Tom Hanks was the accent that he did in Elvis.
Yeah.
It's like, can we...
Hey, Tom.
John, can you stop?
Lay out the accents for a while.
Do it. And then the terminal. I think that's like the one people point to and they're like, why? Huh?
Yeah. Let's unpin the teeth. It is, in fact, the one main consistency they kept from the professor in the 1955 version is that that Tom Hanks, Goldthwait Higginson Dorr, PhD, also has big oversized teeth, which I know they were like, even Tom would probably suggest it, like, oh my God, wouldn't it be so funny if I kept Alex's teeth? But here's the thing, the mirror is actually a great comparison between the two. Alec Guinness plays like a creepy, like old British kind of know-it-all, smart man. Whereas, like Tom Hanks is playing like like a very sudden man. It's a great swap. That's a brilliant swap. It makes it American, but also keeps the broadness of the Alec Guinness character. I can almost imagine why the Coens were excited about doing this change. We can still kind of keep a lot of the same energy, but just make it a Southern character and makes it American. The problem for me and I can't believe I'm saying this, is that the writing of the character and the dialogue of the character is sometimes in conflict with Tom's performance. And sometimes the jokes don't land on me because I'm trying to catch up to what the fuck Tom's doing. I don't know. How about you? I don't know what you feel about that.
Yeah, I think there were at times where I was like, okay, whatever, Tom Hanks is very talented. Whatever he's doing here is half working.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like you said, I don't know if he's not hitting the dialogue the right way. The dialogue's not hitting him the right way. The scene that he's in, he's playing it too straight for all the insanity around him. He's playing it too crazy for everyone just being normal around him. This, the tone shifts are like up, down, left, right, where we're going through so much that I don't, maybe Tom Hanks just couldn't keep up, or maybe they couldn't direct him in the right way. It certainly feels that way. And then even I feel like the accent, he doesn't even fully commit. So that's, to me, reads that he understood he needs to be the level. He's like trying to make everyone match his level. And that's where like J.K. Simmons kind of matches that level.
Right.
Except for all the IBS scenes. But then everyone else is on different planets, basically.
Yes. And it's funny. I think that criticism you said about he couldn't consistently keep the accent is the literal criticism you gave to him, and I agreed with in Pinocchio.
Yeah,
his Geppetto accent is all over the place, and there comes a point where I think this is like makes it clear, like, hey Tom, no more accents. Like don't. If you're looking at a movie with Zemeckis and there's a French character, you, sir, will not be playing that role.
Let Joseph Gordon-Levitt
ruin the French before. It's it's very hard. Oh my God.
We've gone through the cast enough. Well,
oh my God.
Mrs. Munson is,
I got one point to lay out because I'm looking at your notes. I do want to say other movies that we have covered Marlon Wayans and J.K. Simmons in, because I think the list is very funny.
Oh, sure.
Marlon Wayans, of course, was in our Dungeons & Dragons episode last month, but also, that's right, Marlon Wayans also was in G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra, which we, of course, did the G.I. Joe movie, Marmaduke 2010, and we had J.K. Simmons before, only in voiceover for True Grit, but also Marmaduke 2022.
They're voice guys. That's what they do.
But also just like I forgot Marlon was in Marmaduke 2010.
Yeah.
And I forgot that JK voiced somebody, rightfully so, in Marmaduke 2022. Because I genuinely hate Marmaduke, the movie. But
well, and then okay, True Grit. Let's talk about that a little bit, because
please.
So this is in this calendar year we did cover True Grit.
That's true.
Which was the Coen Brothers. These are their only two remakes, I believe?
I believe so. Yeah.
Because I think they've done adaptations that have not had other versions.
This is another really good reason, and it didn't even occur to me that that was the other reason to do Ladykillers. But yeah, you're right, because we covered True Grit, and True Grit is a fantastic film and a great companion piece to the original John Wayne film. Like, clearly, and this was made after Ladykillers, clearly the Coens can get back on their game, get back on their horse, and do this and do some good work again. Which is why the Ladykillers is fascinating in all its mistakes. Like there are things that the Coen Brothers are just good. So there are things that are just well executed because they're just good. But there are things that just miss so far. The quote I think Tarantino on when a good director makes a bad movie is that he said something along the lines of like hacks don't do this good. Hacks don't make a movie this bad.
Yeah.
And it's so clear when it's like look, the bookend of the beginning of the film and the ending of the film is classic Coens, and it feels like the Coens. It's just the middle is all mushed of trying to recreate the events of the previous film, but then trying to add the Americanized stuff in there. But then the Americanized stuff falls in the same problem as the British half. Mm-hmm. It's too much. It's not. And instead of being kind of boring, it's just loud comedy.
Yeah. Instead
of the parrot, there's a cat named Mr. Pickles.
Yeah.
Same scenario. We have to do these broad jokes to get the cat.
I think it's also worth it to talk about the heist itself, because the heist in this film, I can fully see it. I can envision it in my mind where one of the first things that they go, well, we're redoing it. Let's make the heist more tied to the house. Because in the old one, they're just using it as like a meeting point, a safe house, as a cover almost.
Right.
So they're like, what if they're tunneling into a casino? And it's like, okay, I can see where you'd get excited about that idea, but that just goes, I feel like that goes against what the Ladykillers is about. They're not using the house to get somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like a in-between point. It's meant to be as removed as possible.
Right.
And then even throughout the movie, there's other moments like that where I'm like, they would not all be sitting at a Waffle House together. Mm-hmm. The point is that they only all meet together at the house.
Right.
Where they cannot be seen in public.
And that's the other angle that this movie's trying to play. They're dumb.
Yeah.
More obviously dumb than the 1955 version.
Mm-hmm.
They are together because Goldthwait put an ad out and they answered it.
Yeah.
So they're not seasoned criminals.
Yeah. They're
just a bunch of idiots led by a very charismatic but clearly stupid man. And that, again, that sounds funny and it's very Coensy. But it's so too much that it's exhausting in a very different way that the other film was exhausting to us. I need to bring up, of course, Merva Munson, this film's equivalent, Mrs. Winterbrook, and okay, Irma P. Hall, great. She's fantastic. She got the assignment.
Yeah.
And she picked up the assignment and then did A++ work on it, okay? She is fantastic in this movie. The problem with Munson is, I'm sorry, Coens, the writing? You are a couple white dudes writing a Southern black lady who's a God-fearing woman, and it's very stereotypical stuff. And once again, much like the other film, I am having problems with creating empathy towards her, and a lot of it may be because her character is so aggressive.
It does heighten to a point where, this kind of plays into a little what you were talking about in the original, where one character views her as a mother figure. So when Marlon Wayans gets, she hits him because he is cursing in her house,
Right.
And she thinks, well, I better hit him. It's her house. Whatever's going on there feels very stereotypical, but I'm not saying it's not the reality of some people. It's definitely like played for laughs here. But then when you get to that moment where he does see her as his mother, it's extremely literal, where we get like a horrifying flashback.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, like, and another thing that the Coens are good at are like completely rocking your viewpoint of something.
Yeah.
So it's like, as he's walking up to Mrs. Munson, Marlon Wayans, we've jumped to the end where they're trying to kill her.
Yeah.
He's walking up to her chair. The scene, like, I don't even know how, I couldn't even describe if it was a cut or a fade. All of a sudden, it's his house when he's a kid.
Yeah.
And now he's walking up, not to kill her, but with a dog that he wants them to raise.
Yeah.
And the mom is so mad. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really fit anything that happened before.
Right.
And then when he comes back to reality, and then Mrs. Munson gets up, I was like, oh yeah, like this is like he's having, but they're playing it almost like too real.
Right.
I was like, again, the tone is all over the place here. It was an interesting idea,
Yeah.
but it doesn't quite work.
No, I agree. And here, yeah, this is the thing. I think maybe this is consistent on knowing the history of this movie. It's kind of consistent on another film, and it's a weird, broad comparison. But if the concept is the original intent for the Coens was we're just going to write this one, and let Barry figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But our shit will still be in there. Because we're us. We're going to write how we write. Then when Barry leaves, all of a sudden they have to direct it. And now here's the thing. In my opinion, there's a difference between writing for you to direct and writing for someone else to direct. Mm-hmm. Because when you're writing for someone else to direct, you're kind of writing towards their strengths if you're doing that intentionally, right? Anybody who's working with, say, like Christopher Nolan, you're writing a Christopher Nolan movie, You're not writing a movie you're going to do. You're writing, well, what would he do, So the problem might have occurred, this is similar to another movie, or in this case, a trilogy of films, when Peter Jackson only was supposed to co-write the script for The Hobbit for Guillermo del Toro to direct. Then when del Toro left, he did a full rewrite, but still I'm sure he had to keep some of the things that they wrote for del Toro because they built stuff and they got stuff in pre-production. So it's still Guillermo's stuff in there, but Peter had to figure out how to write the movie for him again, which exhausted him probably creatively. So here, I'm assuming what happens, the Coens wrote a movie that was definitely made for Barry Sonnenfeld. Then when they went to go and direct it, they were like, oh shit, okay, well, now it's for us now. And so I think now the inconsistencies comes from making it a movie that they originally were going to write for somebody else, but then throwing their stuff in there, but then that now is a conflict because now they're directing it. And it shows. Because the biggest consistent issue we keep having with this film is that's good, but that's bad, and that's kind of interesting, but that doesn't make any sense, or that doesn't jive, and it makes it a jumbled feeling, And had it been something that maybe they were thinking about to do direct early on, maybe it wouldn't be. And when you look at True Grit, clearly, when they knew that we're doing True Grit.
Yeah.
Boom. Okay, True Grit's fantastic.
Well, and that is a case of like they weren't updating it.
Yeah. Yeah, true. That's also that too.
It wasn't like, okay, it's a 2010 bounty hunter in modern day tech, It was just we're doing it straight.
Right.
This one was they were like, well, it's a comedy, so we have to adapt it for modern comedy sensibilities, which did they? I don't even know. I mean, the audiences say no, I'd say. But since we're talking about the writing and creation, I did have this thought at the end of this movie. Did this inspire them to do Burn After Reading?
That's interesting.
Because J.K. Simmons is in both, but he shows up in their stuff. But in Burn After Reading, it is inept criminals or inept normal-ish people trying to be criminals. And in the course of that movie, a lot of them die. Like, that is kind of like, there's a big punchline with one of the deaths.
It's true.
Where I'm like, oh, did they had that feeling here where they're like, oh, we're so close. They're like, we're so close. Let's just do our thing. And
right.
Because in Burn After Reading, it's not about money necessarily. It's about, well, it is money in the end, but it is like the memoirs of a CIA guy or something. Like, it's like secret information.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's very modern, like, that kind of idea. I was like, oh, I wonder if that like gave them that spark just to do this. Because the end of Burn After Reading also has a very end of this where kind of none of it mattered. Like, it kind of all happened for nothing.
I think that's a really, 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 really good theory, and I think you're probably right. Because like Burn After Reading is the vibe I wanted out of this movie. Dark, funny, like black humor of a bunch of idiots trying to pull something off, and they clearly shouldn't.
Yeah, they're in over their heads.
They're way in over their heads. And I feel like the struggle with this film is that it's also got to do the structure of the other movie. And it is doing it pretty well. Like, it is, like, the first half is setting up their relationship with Mrs. Munson. We are setting up the relationship with all the guys and what they have to do.
And I do think they're throwing in a little bit more where Tom Hanks, where the professor is hanging out with Munson.
Right. And I think that's not a bad idea.
I was like, oh yeah, this is a little more interesting because they have a little more connection. Yeah.
He's trying. I think the way it plays off nicely, I will admit to that, is that he is, doing his quiet time with her. Like, there's that scene where he's just reading a book and she's, doing her thing, and she's just like, they're having a nice light conversation. And I think he's trying to, like, lull her to not suspect him of anything. But I think there might be a little bit of an actual connection between the two. So when he does his version of the scene about once the money is, she finds them with the money, and he's trying to persuade her to, hey, do this instead, right? He is hoping he's connecting with her because they've already connected before. And when he realizes, like, nope, she's still in her very ethical ways of, we are not doing that, sir. Actually, the gag of her looking at her husband's photo, which is like a classic comedy gag of the photo changes expression. Is very good. And a good throwback to, like, kind of like that Preston Sturgeon style that I love so much.
But and it's, again, taking something from the original movie that was one scene.
It's one
and
scene.
they blow it up into a recurring gag.
Right. But yes, like, once you see that she's like, no, we are not doing that. The disappointment in Tom's face is like, lady, I was trying to get you out of this.
Yeah.
Why are you making it harder? Which will lead into their decision of trying to kill her. That's fine. But it's very exhausting because it takes a lot to get there in a movie that is mostly unfunny. Whereas Burn After Reading, again, since, like you said, like, they got the spark and they're like, okay, we can do this. Let's try that again. But it's all our stuff, and it's funny. I think a lot about the shot of Brad Pitt walking out of the closet.
Yeah.
All the time.
I do think, okay, so another thing about this movie that makes no sense. She does not live in a house over a train yard in this film.
No.
She doesn't even live in anything like that. They dispose of stuff over a bridge where a trash barge goes by.
Right.
The bridge is not that close to the house.
Yeah.
They've lost. That's like a
that
whole
was part of the thing. In the
that's like a
original
whole thing. That was like built into the movie as, like, it's funny that the house is over where they can dump bodies.
Right.
And now it's like, well, they have to drive down the street.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, so how does, I think the 55 film does a pretty good job of kind of papering over the logic of why doesn't Miss Wilberforce call the police immediately?
Right.
She's like, well, I'll call them in the morning. I'm tired, whatever. In this one, Miss Munson, why wouldn't she?
Right.
I don't see why she wouldn't. As soon as the deal goes wrong with the professor, where he can't convince her, why would she be like, okay, well, take the night. Everyone take the night, and I'll get you in the morning. Like,
right.
Does she? She doesn't believe them that they would stay. So
right.
I'm like, what? That, and she like allows them to drive the car to go here. To go,
right.
Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
I will say, the DP of this film is good old Raji Deakins.
Yeah, Roger Deakins. It's so insane.
But what's kind of neat, and again, the moment you learn that Barry Sonnenfeld was originally going to DP it, the fun part about Roger Deakins' DP work here, he went Barry. Mm-hmm. This is a very Barry Sonnenfeld vibe. He kind of was doing a lot of Barry Sonnenfeld's, like, visuals and Dutch angles and camera turns.
Well,
and I went,
the trash,
you don't shoot like this.
The Trash Barge and Trash Island are miniatures.
Yes.
That's very Barry.
That's very Barry.
Yeah.
And it was almost like, for a second, I was like wondering, did Barry come back for this? No, he was. No, I know for a fact he didn't come back to DP at Coen's film. Then when I saw his name in the producer credit, I'm like, oh. Then I saw Deakins. Roger Deakins did that? I mean, it looks great. Roger Deakins, clearly. Yeah. But it's very much Roger Deakins, like, echoing. It's almost if he's like, I wanted this to look like Raising Arizona. And because the film is in a heightened reality, I think he was like, "Oh, let's have fun. Yeah, let's have like a little more fun angles and different perspectives and things like that." Because we're doing goofy Coens this time, you know. Yeah, the film does end in pretty much the third act is essentially the same scenario.
The deaths are a little different, but that's because the characters are a little different.
Yeah,
it's Marlon Wayans' character who he has trouble. He's the short straw.
Yeah.
And he has trouble killing her, but then ends up J.K. Simmons' character accidentally shoots him.
Right.
So that's the first death, which is again accidental.
Mm-hmm.
But then it goes down the line
Right.
of then J.K. Simmons tries to steal the money.
Mm-hmm.
So then they send the general out to kill him and I guess Mountain Girl, like, right? That's
Yeah, you know, it's implied he killed because Mountain Girl
was driving the
was
getaway
driving
car.
the car, and like, yeah, he kills Mountain Girl, and yeah, definitely Mountain Girl's dead. Yeah.
Wait, and I just still can't get over that, where it's like this movie does give us sympathy for these characters,
Yeah.
and then in the same way, just without a thought, kills them, and is like, isn't that funny? It's like, it's not as funny this time. And then
The general dies in a very ridiculous manner.
so ridiculous.
Yeah.
This stayed with me all those years, where I was like, this is why this movie is stupid. Because again, they take a recurring gag of he's not allowed to smoke in the house.
Mm.
So what he does is he flips in his mouth the cigarette into his mouth.
I want to point out, I love that.
It's funny.
It's funny, and it's such a great visual gag
Uh-huh.
that he kills it every time. It's always funny to me. But
yes, they use that to be part of his downfall,
yeah,
where he like chokes on it as he's about to kill Mrs. Munson. Chokes on it, drinks her teeth water, the
Yeah.
denture water,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
has got to, that must have been so disgusting. And then he falls and hits his head and dies on the stairs.
right.
And then the final two, so it's Lump
Mm-hmm.
and the Professor.
Yeah.
And even though I knew how this movie ended, as it was ending, I was like, I'm like, does Tom Hanks just drop dead? Like, I was really like, I was like, how did they do it? So, but Lump tries to shoot Tom Hanks because he's like, well, we're not killing Mrs. Munson. She's a nice old lady. We should return the money.
Which goes back to one round.
But then he thinks the gun misfires, and so he literally shoots himself because he's so stupid.
Right.
Which I'm like, oh my God, it's like such a boring type of character.
Yeah.
Except when he's saying coach. That is funny. So then he falls backwards onto the barge.
Yeah.
It's like the joke is that the barge is always there to catch him. And so then Tom Hanks is standing there and he sees like a bird, a raven, and he starts quoting Edgar Allan Poe.
Because he likes Edgar Allan Poe.
But then the raven lands on like a gargoyle on the bridge, and that falls off and hits him in the head.
And again, Coens are not dumb guys. They established that gargoyle in literally the first shot.
Yeah.
You know, they established the barge after that gargoyle. So they are setting up their geography. This is, again, they're good. But the problem is that, like, that is not as funny.
No.
As Peter's, I almost did it. It's not Peter.
It's
Alec
not Peter,
Guinness.
yeah.
Alec Guinness having that fight with Louis under the bridge, and it looks like he succeeds, and then that last piece of wood in the bridge falls on Alex's head. That's his downfall.
Yeah.
And like, that's funny because he just did this big successful thing.
Mhm.
Here, because Lump shot himself, it's not as like
No.
exciting. It's like it kind of, there is a part where he's like, no, you should have figured out a Lump versus Professor fight.
Yeah, if you're gonna have them be the last two.
Yeah. And yeah, instead it you know, it's interesting that like he, you know, like how Professor's body goes down, but also then the Coen's music choice makes it feel weirdly like ethereal and like, isn't this sort of ironically funny? And it's like, I guess.
Yeah, not really.
You know. And it ends exactly the same way as the other film. You know, Mrs. Munson goes off.
In this one, she donates all the money.
She donates all the money.
In the 55 one, it's kind of implied she's gonna use it for her own gain. But in this one, because she is a God-fearing woman, and because it was brought up earlier when Tom Hanks was trying to convince her of donating the money to a university.
That's what he said he's going to do. What we're going to do with that money, ma'am, is that we're going to take that money to this thing called the Bruce Jones University, which is like
Bob.
Bob
It had
Jones
like
University.
Bob. Yeah, Bob was part of it for sure. Because I was like, that's really. I don't know if that's
Bob
a real
Jones
school.
University. It is a wait.
Okay.
It might be a real school. It is a Bible college.
Okay.
So
I do like the idea of it. It feels very Coen Brothers to have a school named Bob. You know, like
It's very simple. Bob Jones.
It's not Robert Jones. It's
No,
Bob Jones. Yeah.
University, a Bible college that she admires.
I do want to point. Okay, some of the other Coen Brothers. I think these are things that are supposed to be jokes, but it's like the fact that so Tom Hanks is Goldthwait Higginson Dorr, PhD, but he goes by GH. So GH Dorr, PhD. Like that's just funny to say,
right?
But I think it's like it gets lost in all of this like nonsense of this movie.
Like if he had like a plaque on a wall and it says GH.
GHD PhD, yeah,
that's funny.
Or his like license plate or something.
Yeah.
But then even like Marlon Wayne's his character is Gawain McSam. Gawain, that's a one of Arthur's knights. Like it's so Garth Pancake. Like what an insane.
I didn't even. Yeah, I knew his name was Garth. I forgot his last name was Pancake. It's barely in the film. And again, like
Pancake and Mountain Girl.
You could have had a joke when they were at the Waffle House place that that Pancake was at Waffles.
And then we didn't even talk. George Wallace plays the sheriff. George Wallace is so funny.
He's not in it a lot, but he's kind of well executed.
Yeah, this was like the addition that this movie needed.
Yeah,
was that make the main cop funnier?
Yeah,
because in the 55 one, it's like okay, it's like two guys, two different cops, whatever. This one, it's like no, we made it so that the main cop is way funnier.
The thing, and it's so simple because he doesn't overdo it.
No,
he beautifully plays the idea of a cop who's just at this, very quiet beat, this very quiet part of the town. And then here's Mrs. Munson coming in, and he's always like, yes, ma'am, what can we do for you today? How can we help you? No problem. Like, even at one point at the end of it, she's like, and then Pickles, ma'am, this is what this is about. You want me to go get Pickles? Like, no, I don't want to. No, Pickles is at home. Okay.
The added scene with him coming to the house and Tom Hanks hiding under the bed. That's funny.
It's funny.
That was funny. And I don't know how to describe that that's funnier than the other parts of the movie that aren't funny.
I think this is where we talk about the tension, right?
Yeah.
We didn't talk about the tension much in this version. The tension isn't as strong as the other one.
Mm-hmm.
But this scene is the closest, and it's theirs, because the idea that Hanks clearly doesn't want to see the cops, period, at all. So he's hiding under his bed. And then what it looks like is that Mrs. Muntz is talking to nothing.
Yeah.
Under the bed, giggling to herself.
Yeah. They already think that she's out of her mind. Right. And now here she is.
Talking to nothing under the bed while Hanks is doing shush, shush.
Uh-huh.
And, at this point, George Wallace's sheriff character is just like, okay, ma'am, can I go?
He says, he's like, I got a family. I have dinner on the table. That's such a funny line because he's like being so honest about he's like, I gotta get out of here.
It's so late, Mrs. Munson. Let me leave.
But yeah, that is so. Yeah, that is the tension. I even had it. I was like, oh, has he had a run-in with the law before? Mm-hmm. Is he purposely trying to avoid?
Is that why
this sheriff? Because the sheriff will look at him and go, oh no. Something is wrong. You
know what's funny about that? In another remake, someone would have came up with that as oh, this is a con artist, and he's had multiple identities throughout the country. So maybe that's why his character is so broad and cartoony, and he can take out his false teeth. And obviously, he's Tom Hanks. That someone could have come up with that as an alternate remake. I think. And that's not saying that's better. I'm just saying that's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But no, this man is definitely talks like this. This is how I act, and
yeah, I it's not a good movie. I think that's I want to make sure we get that across. That
let's be yes. Look, the 1955 film. I'm sorry I didn't connect to it. I apologize repeatedly on this episode if you're a big fan, because it's one of those where it's it didn't really work for me. I'm sorry. I'm not apologizing for not liking this one. A lot of people seem to have agreed that this was not very good.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, if this wasn't remade, is set in the American South with a man with the most Colonel Sanders Foghorn Leghorn accent, then it would be nothing new.
Please rate and review Nothing New, a Remake podcast on your podcast app.
You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at NothingNewPod.
You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/nothingnnew.
Nothing New, a remake podcast, is part of the Benview Network.